I'm a DJ boy, going to Decentral, minting NFT, farming DeFi, being crypto poor but JPay rich.
Yeah, we're here to talk about social DAOs and building decentralized communities. I'm Jeff Kelley, co-host of the Edge of NFT podcast and also coordinator of NFT LA. Amazing panel here. I wanted to take 30 seconds each, maybe go down the line, introduce yourself, and talk to us for a moment about the project you're working on.
All right. I'm Shaan. Nice to meet everyone. I'm the head of Web3 partnerships at Ionixx Technologies. We build Web3 applications for entrepreneurs.
I'm Jon. During the day, I am a blockchain engineer for Linkpool in the Chainlink ecosystem, and at night, I am one of the founders of the ATX DAO.
Hey guys, I'm Dan, or Daniel. I'm the DAO master for both MODA DAO and for Ionixx.
Hey everyone. Am I on? Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Elmer Morales. I'm the founder and CEO of Campus DAO. Previously, I've been a software engineer in the space for a long time, and now building something cool in the Web3 space.
Nice, thanks guys. So let's start with the basics for a moment. Who has the best description of what a DAO is that you would use to describe this to your grandparents?
I'll take that. So the way I think about a DAO is, think about it as a corporation, right? Corporations have stock and they have shares that investors and employees own. A DAO is similar to a corporation, but instead of shares, you have tokens, right? So rather than being limited to a U.S. audience, a DAO is a global organization, if you will, that can be owned by the community, the members, investors, founders, and so forth.
Society, communities are incredibly complex. What are the advantages of building a community as a decentralized DAO?
I think one of the biggest advantages is the fact that it's autonomous. So the community can manage it, and it autonomously executes the inherent logic within the DAO, even when the community is not awake and at their computers. And I think transparency is also a very big deal, especially depending on the use case you're looking at. So for charitable DAOs, transparency is a big thing. It's auditable at any given moment. Those are just two. I'm sure there's several more.
Yeah, I think when we think of traditional companies, you think of top-down. And I think with community DAOs especially, it really gets everybody's voice. So a bottom-up approach of voices that you may have never heard from in a traditional company that give proposals out, or at least initiate proposals that everybody can vote on, which that idea in a traditional company would never be heard.
Yeah, it's empowerment. That's DAOs are about voting. DAOs are about giving the ability for the community holders and the token holders to have the power over the direction of where the DAO might be heading, have a say in what is going to be happening. But the way that I look at it is, and it might be a bit of a contrarian approach, potentially utopian as well, and maybe naive, but flat and horizontal. The core contributors of those who are building the DAO and the community, they work hand in hand. It's not like we have a hierarchical approach. It's more like everyone collectively works together on delivering and executing on what the mission is.
Yeah, and I think another advantage of a DAO is really giving access to early adopters. A lot of times people find a cool project and they're not really able to participate in that upside, right? So I think if you discover something cool and you're part of it and you help build it, participating in that upside is really key because you get rewarded for that, early adoption. In the traditional, model prior to DAOs, you really, you might get a retweet or something like that, but you really don't get to participate in that upside if you had discovered Twitter, on month one.
Yeah, one of the beautiful things about what you guys just talked about is that low barrier to entry and accessibility for literally anybody. I wanted to ask, when you think about communities in general, what makes a community ripe for the DAO model? Like, what are the attributes of a community you would look for that say, yeah, you know what, that's a good fit for a DAO?
I want to say Austin is a great place for this, just because with COVID, And all of this migration into Austin, you have so many new people coming into this city that don't know anybody, and they're either crypto curious or they are into the blockchain ecosystem already, but they have no friends in Austin. And what do you do then? And so ATX DAO is really a big networking group that we have a bunch of meetups in real life, unlike traditional DAOs where everything is online. But we create that bond between our members because we meet each other. We go out and have beers. We work on projects together. We get people jobs. We get people that need employees. And so we just create a massive network. So for Austin, with all of these new people coming here, I think it's a great ecosystem.
I think it also comes down to the specific mission at hand. Like, what is the DAO trying to achieve? And as like what we are trying to achieve, who are the people that are going to be able to do that? So if I'm trying to, for example, buy a Bored Ape and I want to fractionalize the IP and give ownership rights back to those who hold it, you're probably not looking at people who are just entering into the space. More than likely looking at people who have a little bit more money sitting in their wallets, and they might want to have a little bit of a piece of what could be potentially quite a valuable asset. But then what we're doing at MODA DAO, we're trying to enable fair ownership rights for all musicians and for all artists on chain. So the people that we need to be able to do that are those who love music and those who want to make it. So it really does come down to what am I trying to do and who are the people that are going to be able to help me to do it.
I think the most important thing is having clarity, like having a very clear mission. As long as the community knows exactly what it wants to achieve and it can write down the rules for how to achieve it, then everything else is easy. But I think the most important thing is having clarity on what the common mission is or the objective is.
Elmer, you said with Campus that we were talking a little bit about that before. I think you have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think communities that are really active and engaged and want to be part of the building of that entity, if you will, or I would say are ripe for that. A lot of times, people discover things early on and they just feel so connected to that mission that they're interested in helping out, even if there's not an official role, right? Call it a volunteer, if you will. But when you have a community with a lot of passionate members like that, I think that's very ripe for a DAO type of structure.
Got it. So passionate members that are aligned around a particular vision that want to actually be involved. These are some of the attributes of a community that could be ripe for a DAO structure. Right. I wanted to ask you, Jon, you mentioned this backstage, this connection to other communities, not just like ATX DAO, right, but also looking outside of the borders of Austin. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so what ATX DAO really is trying to do is build the blueprint for city DAOs. And so we've talked to other cities that have that same need or want, but they don't know how to do it. And so for us at ATX DAO, we started with not a single idea of how to do this. And we created our Discord and created our website and literally threw everything at the wall to try to figure out how to do this right. And so for us, we want to help other cities that want to do the same thing that we're doing in their own communities as well. And so we're reaching out to different cities from Tokyo to Istanbul to different states around the country to teach them how we did it and then at least point them in the right directions to start their own communities in their own cities.
Right on, exciting stuff. Like building any community is difficult, right? Never mind one that has the infrastructure that you're talking about, the guidelines, voting, all the different dynamics. What are some of the pitfalls of DAOs?
Poor code, poorly written code. I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls. It also leads to a lot of security issues if the code doesn't address some eventualities. And then I think the second thing to be aware of is regulation. There's no such regulation at the moment, but I feel like it's coming and it's creeping up on us pretty fast. I wrote a blog post maybe a month ago about how DAOs and traditional enterprise organizations are, like the gap is narrowing between the two. And I think A16Z and Andreessen Horowitz wrote another blog post maybe 10 days back about how every DAO should find a jurisdiction. They should think about the legislation that's about to come. There's no legislation, but we kind of know what it's going to look like. Right now it's just in the metaverse, but eventually you'll have to pick a jurisdiction, and you'll have to operate more like a business. That's not, a lot of crypto people don't want that, but that's I feel like that's that's coming pretty fast. So that's another pitfall.
We're also actually, speaking about legislation, we're pretty lucky over in Australia. I think DAOs are slowly becoming more of a recognised, legitimate business model. So potentially in that part of the world, things are maybe a little bit more progressive or a little bit more faster moving. But then in terms of other pitfalls, I would also think about speculation overall. So you're trying to build a community of people who are engaged in, again, your core mission, what you're trying to achieve. But in any project or any launch or anything in crypto right now, there's more than likely going to be someone who's just trying to have their next flip and make some money. So it's about trying to figure out how to navigate that particular problem. Either one, turn those people into supporters by providing them with certain attributes or I don't know, empowerment. But yeah, it's the de-incentivization of sell pressure essentially, and just trying to make sure that your DAO can hopefully succeed in the space. We're still so early, and I'm sure that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see legitimate DAOs come from these really, really early grassroots steps.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a quick comment on the poorly written code. I think that's definitely one of the pitfalls. But I think the way that we should think about DAOs is think of them as traditional organizations. So even though they're decentralized and they're anybody can contribute and get access to open source code, I think you still want to have people within the communities that are leaders that can sort of help navigate and define guidelines, right? In the case of code, I think there could be coding standards and other things that are still in place within the DAO that people have to follow. So I think you could, and that's what we're doing at Campus DAO, right? I think, given we have a pretty strong background in building software organizations, we're applying that same model within the DAO, is making members within the community who have been vetted, who are experts that can play a leadership role and guide and do code reviews and things like that. So I think you could still make it work if you just sort of translate the traditional how to run a company model into the DAO space.
Yeah, I think to speak on that as well, like as a company, a lot of people don't talk about the growing pains as far as a DAO goes, because as far as ATX, we started with 5 people, then went to 25, then 100, and 1,000, whatever. It needs to scale, and you need to not grow so quickly that you outpace yourself. So for us, we really tried to create a solid base that would allow us to scale to that next level. So we have our committees that will each do their own little thing to help our DAO grow into that size. And so I think the biggest pitfall is somebody growing too quickly or running with an idea without really thinking it through. So the best advice I would say is sit down and really figure out like who are your key players to really create that base, and then from there, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, so don't leave behind the lessons learned from traditional business, traditional organizational structures, traditional community structures, right? Take the best of it, leave the bad behind, and continue to grow. Dan, you mentioned just the flat nature of the organization and that being a tenet of what you're doing. How do you maintain that over time as committees form or people gain a little bit more influence or even voting power within the organization? How do you maintain that vision of a generally flat organization?
That's a good question. The way that I started thinking about organization of DAOs just in general is maybe thinking about it as a living, breathing organism. If you think about like how a cell exists, you've got the barriers of the cell. In this like, metaphor or analogy, you could think of the barriers as the core mission. And then within each part of that cell, you've got different parts that make up that cell, working groups. You've got marketing, you've got tokenomics, if it's applicable, gamification, you've got something called DSC, which is the DAO-specific component. With MODA, that's got to do with music. With Ionixx, that's got to do with Move to Earn. So there are all these little individual working groups all working together cohesively, trying to figure out how to solve the core mission. And as long as you have some sort of, and I might get battered for this, but if you get some sort of organizational, potentially centralized organizational structure within that flat horizontal structure, things will move. The analogy and the way that I think about it is say you're trying to sail a ship out to sea. Everyone has the exact same voting power, and everyone has a voice. The problem with that is that if everyone's saying, I want to go east, west, south, north, the boat's just going to sail in circles. You need someone to give some sort of direction. You need someone to give some sort of, we're going to go here because we want to do this. That's kind of how I'm looking at it, is that you need that flat structure so that everyone can work cohesively, still maintain that organization so that we can achieve that core mission.
Yeah, that North Star is pretty important.
Yeah.
A lot of people thinking about this right now, a lot of people here probably are wondering, how can I launch a DAO to support my community, to grow my community, to achieve these same goals that we're talking about here on stage? What input, what advice would you have for folks that are looking legitimately to do this? Actionable advice.
I'll take a stab at that. I think the first part about building a DAO is really creating a community and a mission and getting people, to support that mission. So I think, before you go out and create a DAO and create a DAO token and do all this, formality stuff, I think testing out the market and seeing whether there's demand for what you're building and whether you can rally a community around that. I would say in the traditional tech startup world, that would normally be an MVP, right? Where you go out and see if your idea has merit, would people actually buy it? So I would say do some sort of proof of concept, for your DAO and see if people, would have interest. I'll give an example. So I'm involved with another project called the Exotic Car Club, which is an NFT and a DAO that is essentially doing fractional ownership of exotic cars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, things like that. So being part of the club allows you to rent and essentially take a McLaren out for a spin as long as you're part of that club. And so one of the things that they did to sort of prove that model is they hosted a small event out in Orange County, got about 50 people together, and they tested the market to see if, would people buy this, right? And out of those 50 people, probably 40 of them were I'm in immediately, right? I no longer have to buy a Lamborghini. I can now just spend, this few hundred or a few $1,000s on this DAO token, and I can be part of that and get access to the cars, right? So I think that was a good example of a proof of concept and how someone should test the waters. So I would say that would be sort of step one, and then step two is then go and make it a little bit more formal. So many people don't know this, but here in the U.S., Wyoming actually created a legal structure for a DAO. It's a DAO LLC. They're the first to innovate within the United States, and I'm sure there's others around the world that are going to follow them. But researching the Wyoming DAO and setting up a LLC structure there is probably step two, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's really goal oriented, like any other company. When you start a company, you have to have a goal in mind, not just to start a company to start it. So for your DAO, figure out what that goal is that you want to attain to, and then find those people that have that same goal. So with ATX DAO, when we first started this, our goal was to be the crypto capital of the world. And so every one of our members believes that same point, and that's why we progress further and further. And a point with the government side is because we are a community DAO and a city DAO, we can help build the legal structure and the government structure by doing that as well. And so we're in talks with local and state and even in federal level legislation to really get the crypto side of things better in not only Austin but Texas.
So,
could I just jump in?
Go ahead, jump in. Shaan.
To get more technical, I think of it as development, funding, and deployment. So once you got the community stuff figured out and the business side figured out, then you develop the DAO, create the governance mechanisms, and then you would think about how you're going to fund it. So every DAO has to have a treasury. The treasury is a little bit of money that the DAO needs to execute the inherent logic within the DAO. So if the DAO is about buying and selling NFTs, there needs to be some money in the DAO to buy the first few NFTs. So the second step is funding, and then the third step is deployment. And that would be where all the logic that you've created, you put it online on one of the blockchains, and then the developers would step back and the community would step forward, and then the governance from that point onward would be with the community. And our company can help out with the development part of the DAO once the business logic and the community is figured out.
I've also started thinking about, like just on this, about how DAOs can potentially be a little bit scary, but the mechanics of a DAO and what a DAO is trying to achieve at the end of the day could be quite applicable across the board in different variations. So I've been working on different ideas for artists, and just quickly, think about how musicians have teams of people who will help them do what they need to do best. Musicians are artists at the end of the day, they're just trying to create their art. But then behind them, they're going to have a manager, they're going to have A&R, publicist, etc., etc. Instead of that model, what if the team was decentralized? What if you built a community of thousands of people, all who could bring opportunities to that artist? So instead of having this small group of people, 4 to 8 minds, you've got thousands of minds. You've got someone in your community who happens to know someone at Sony Records who can get you a publishing deal. You've got someone in your community who knows Cole Bennett at Lyrical Lemonade and can get you a music video. You're essentially leveraging your community to further your career along, but you wouldn't necessarily deem that as a DAO, not in my opinion anyway. I've thought of it as close to a base. You're building a fan base of people. So the mechanics at a root level still work, but just slightly differently.
Yeah, so take note. These guys have been there, done that. They're doing it now. Actionable steps for sure. We appreciate that, guys. One part of learning and building that I've always appreciated is looking to others that have been there and done that. And I'm wondering, in your view, other than your own projects, what do you see as the most effective functioning DAOs in the space that we should look to for inspiration or guidance?
Yeah, so one DAO that I'm a fan of is Gitcoin DAO. So they're doing a lot of cool stuff for developers in the space, and they've really been very transparent about every decision, every vote, everything. The founder at Gitcoin is really not about getting rich quick. It's more about like, hey, how do we support the community? And so I'm a big fan of that. But I think for those of you in the audience that are looking for a good model or someone to follow, right, to see what they're doing and how to run a DAO, I think Gitcoin DAO is, I'm certainly a fan of them.
I really like Decentraland, and I'm not associated with the project or anything, but I think it's a really cool DAO, and it's an example of a very complicated DAO with many moving parts. So Decentraland allows you to it allows you to do like city management and asset, like you can buy digital assets in the metaverse. And another DAO I really like is Badger DAO. So Badger DAO allows it creates DeFi opportunities for people who are holding Bitcoin. And both those, Badger DAO is slightly smaller. Decentraland is a much bigger project. I'm associated to neither, but I think they're very cool projects.
I think there's when we think of a DAO, I think it's such a broad term now. And so when you think of traditional, even in DeFi companies, you wouldn't think of certain DeFi projects as DAOs, but a lot of them are. And so when you actually go into, say, Snapshot, and you go in and look at all of the different projects that are happening, you say, wow, like this is a DAO, that's a DAO. And a lot of companies don't have to just be DAOs. They can have a DAO mechanism as part of their company, as they have some type of voting strategy or governance token or something that any company can be a DAO. You don't have to label yourself a DAO. Any company can be a DAO as long as they allow their employees or their users to have some type of say on how that company runs in the future. So I'm not necessarily bullish on any certain DAO outside of ATX DAO, but I am bullish on the whole governance principle, being able to help your company grow from the bottom up.
I fully agree with that. Personally, I don't think anyone's quite cracked it just yet. I think I agree with Shaan that Decentraland is pretty cool. Again, I'm not associated with the project either. But I think the reason why we have these conversations, the reasons why we sit up here at these conferences and you guys listen to us is because no one's quite cracked it just yet. And it's such an exciting opportunity for people to come out of the woodwork and work together and build something that truly kind of pushes the envelope forward. I don't think that anyone's done it perfectly, and potentially there's not going to happen for another 5 to 10 years. Eventually it will happen. But I just think if you're thinking about a DAO to specifically follow, I would say follow as many as you possibly can, read as much as you possibly can, and try to take each part that you think is really good and resonates with you and turn it into something different.
Yeah, and just a few other thoughts on that. I think, to his point, we're still early, right? DAOs is a very new concept. Even though it's been around for a couple of years, it's barely picking up traction. And so I would say, follow a bunch of people, a bunch of other DAOs, do your due diligence, but also think outside the box, right? I think one example of thinking outside the box is like, Goblin Town NFT. You guys probably heard of them in the last 2 weeks. Everybody thought the playbook was, XYZ that everyone was following, and they just came out and said, hey, we're this new NFT project. It's free, no roadmap, no Discord, no nothing. We're going to go on Twitter Spaces and just make random goblin noises and fart sounds. And it went from a free mint to 9 ETH in a couple days, right? So I think I'm a big fan of thinking outside the box and just doing things differently. Just because it hasn't, someone hasn't done it doesn't mean you can't do it.
Yeah, Elmer, you said it. We're really at the beginning, and there's so much more. In your guys' view, what is that? What's the next step for DAOs? What does the future hold in terms of innovation, evolution, different features? What are you excited about?
So I actually I like the point that Jon made, and I think that's kind of the future for DAOs, where you're going to have DAOs within enterprise corporations or organizations. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a food company that creates bread, for example. And once the bread comes out, you could have a DAO, which is it's a conveyor belt with all kinds of sensors, and they take pictures and they measure how the bread's doing, and you could just call it the quality control DAO. And automatically, you put your bread on there, all the machines, everything else, it's hooked up to the DAO through oracles. And it comes out on the other side, and you either get a pass or a fail for each piece of bread, for each loaf of bread. So you could have DAOs within corporations. So the quality control DAO is one concept, but you could have it at any stage of industrial manufacturing or even regular marketing processes or anything else. So I think the space between traditional enterprise organizations and DAOs is closing really fast. And then the second big thing is, which I think is going to be huge, is that there's an explosion of sensors and IoT devices across the world. They're everywhere. And if you think of each sensor, it's a potential oracle. So you could have granular data, and you could have multiple sources of that data to confirm that it's real from anywhere, in any room, in any on any highway, in any restaurant. So that just opens up the use cases for DAOs, where you could have a DAO for almost everything. For example, I'll give you a logistics example. Let's say you're shipping freight across the Canadian border. So there's a truck that's driving up past Detroit, and it enters Canada. As soon as it crosses a certain point, the IoT device in the truck says, it gives the GPS signal that we've crossed this point, which means all the vendors before that point can be paid. All the contracts before that point can be settled. And all of that can happen programmatically. So it significantly reduces the operational costs of a person coming and verifying all that. And going forward, you can add quality control, you can add a lot of your paperwork, your international compliance, all of that stuff just could be different DAOs or different smart contracts within a larger DAO.
Right on. Other thoughts, guys? What does the future hold?
I completely agree as far as large companies integrating some type of governance protocol into their system. It is interesting when you're talking about the IoT devices, working with Chainlink. That's kind of our whole bread and butter, is bringing the data from the real world into smart contracts. And so when you're talking about a governance side of that is having the ability to use proposals in a certain way that, again, from the very bottom, where you have workers that could have awesome ideas, to bring that into fruition, that is amazing.
Yeah, and I think as far as the future of DAOs, I think where this is really going to become a big deal is within the startup space. So traditional startups would have to go to raise venture capital funding and essentially get approval from some male individual on whether their startup should get funding or not, right? And so I think a lot of startups are going to be better served with the DAO model, enabling their community, who's also going to be the users, the supporters, the buyers of their product, to make those decisions rather than some individual in Silicon Valley, right? So I'm excited and bullish on startups just kind of looking at the DAO model as a better form of fundraising and governance rather than what we've seen in the past 10 years.
I think what's really, really interesting about everybody's points that's just been made, and I'm kind of summarizing it in my mind, it's almost like the future of a DAO is there a decision to be made, and is there value in that decision having more than one person thinking about it? You can do that as micro as you want and as macro as you want. Imagine a DAO that was literally a sovereign state of 1 million people living there that were governing themselves. It'd be such an interesting thought concept to be able to do that. I mean, in democracy that exists, but I think DAOs are kind of like the next step in what democracy could be. And then on a micro level, when you're essentially eliminating issues within the supply chain, or you are creating opportunities for decisions to be made without the need for headache or without the need for all this other superfluous things in the middle.
Could I add one more point? I think the first class of DAOs we're going to see as soon as regulation allows self-driving cars is people just buying fleets of Teslas and deploying them on ride-sharing apps and organizing them in a DAO where the car gets itself serviced, it picks up and drops passengers, it pays tickets if it gets tickets or whatever else. So you're going to have a DAO that's going to have a physical implication in our real world, but it's all going to be governed through a DAO. I think that's the first, as soon as they allow self-driving cars, that's the first batch of DAOs we're going to get.
Yeah, this is seriously disruptive, game-changing, society-shifting stuff we're talking about here. So thank you so much for sharing that. We only have a few minutes left and wanted to take a little bit of time and answer any questions from the audience. So let's do that right now. So we got one right in the middle here in the blue shirt.
I think like we talked about, there needs to be some type of leadership in any DAO. It can't just be a bunch of people running around with their heads chopped off. It needs to have structure. And I think if you're a good DAO, you have structure. So if something happens, say like that, you have the ability to have people take control and then figure out what needs to be done from there.
I think it's also, a lot of it starts at the beginning. I think in the case of Luna, if you look at their smart contract and the way it works is months ago, prior to the crash, a couple of weeks ago, a lot of people already saw that coming. I mean, the code to begin with, the way it was structured, it was sort of a disaster in the making, right? People just were in denial about it. And so I think in the case of DAO, outside of having good leadership, I think you need to have a good engineering team, good engineering leaders that can prevent that from being written in a smart contract to begin with.
And I would say a lot of research before you enter a DAO. I know there's a lot of stable coins that are not pegged to the US dollar, but they claim they are. So they're just loopholes they go around. So a lot of research before you get into it. And as far as, I agree with Jon, as far as the mechanisms to course correct when something goes wrong. You need to have some leadership in place.
Thanks, guys. Other questions?
For sure. 100%. That's the model that I'm kind of thinking about, yeah. So when you've got your cell and your individual working groups, you could have maybe one leadership DAO, which is, 10 people, and you need a supermajority vote to pass something, which will then potentially go around to the rest of the working groups as well, where you might have a working group that will work on marketing or a working group that will work on the tokenomics or the gamification. Each time decisions need to be passed, micro votes will need to occur in the DAO before it kind of goes forward. And then potentially you could even think of the final step as some sort of DAO light, where the broader community who hold the tokens, the token holders, those are the ones that are empowered. We need your green light, we need your DAO light to be able to proceed with what we want to do.
And I'd like to add that it's kind of like distributed proof of stake, where it's proof of stake and everyone's involved, but like let's say every 100 users appoint one person. to the leadership committee, something like that. So you need to have, I would say, a couple of leadership mechanisms. One which is crowdsourced from the entire community, and then one could just be like the founders of the project or someone that's involved more full time.
Appreciate that. You guys, that's our time here. Before we break, I wanted to make sure we had a chance to let the panelists share where you can find them on socials and follow their projects.
So my name's Shaan Ray. I don't think I'm up on the board today. It's SHAAN, N for Nebraska, .RAY. And it's Shaan Ray at Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Medium. Same name everywhere.
Jon Gregis, you can check out the ATX DAO at atxdao.com. Come to our event on Friday. We have a really big banger going on, so go to atxdao.com/events and check us out and get an Eventbrite ticket. You can catch me on Twitter at AnonJon, that's AN0N_JON, or Jon_Gregis for Instagram.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at DAOMasterDan. You can find the projects I work at, so MODA_DAO, MODA_DAO. There's also Pummel, PUML, and Jack Space, which is a company that I've co-founded, which was the ideas that we were talking about earlier.
Cool. So I'm Elmer Morales. Thanks for coming to our talk. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Elmer M, and you can follow my company Campus, which helps brands build spaces in the metaverse. We're on Twitter and Instagram as Campus Metaverse, at Campus Metaverse.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I'm Jeff Kelley, Edge of NFT Podcast, at Edge of NFT on all socials. Thanks again for coming out today, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.